Очень
Friends, it is my pleasure to welcome you. We're ready to start our section on the space of education, and we shall talk about the current trends in educational space in today's world, the space where educational processes take place, namely schools, universities, and new formats of educational spaces that are emerging today, and namely how technologies and new technological expectations and the demand of new high-tech society impacts the processes undergoing within schools and universities. My name is Natalia Chebatad. I shall moderate this discussion. I'm editor-in-chief of a magazine on new technologies in education, Edutainment magazine. On my right is Sharon Har, who is the head of the Department of City Planning at the University of Michigan. And on my left is Patrick Shen, Director for Economic Development of a huge scientific and educational cluster in Paris-Saclay, very close to Paris, where right now the Research and Development Center is being set up, and schools and universities are being transferred there or somehow represented in this cluster where a new economy is going to be created, if I may say so. And now I'd like to suggest that Sharon would start by sharing with us what is actually happening in educational spaces, what are the new current trends in educational architecture, because over the last 3 years, we've seen dramatic changes and even revolution happening in education. New technologies are very new, and the year 2012 was called the Moon Year, and in edX we have around 5 million students. At Han Academy we have around 4 million students, and Clayton Christian University is stating that by 2019 about half of all educational programs in schools would be online distant education program or online programs or go hand in hand with this offline part. How do you assess the current processes?
Okay, thank you.
you have to push the button.
Hello? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay. Well, thank you for having me here today, and it's really been great to be at the Moscow Urban Forum for the past couple of days and to see some really exciting presentations and have some really interesting conversations with colleagues, well, new colleagues and new friends who I've gotten to meet, and to see how much interest there is and how much overlap there is in work that we do actually internationally or actually even globally. And I think that the fact that such a large number of people can come together, talk about ideas around the formation of the city and its architecture and its spaces and its infrastructure, and have information to share with one another, really makes, I think, really demonstrates how globalized and connected we really are today. I'm just going to make, I don't know if this was in the Russian or in the English translation, I'm just going to make one point of clarification before I begin. I'm not an urban planner. I'm an architect by training and an urbanist by interest. So I'm professor and chair of the architecture program at the University of Michigan, but one of the things that I've been studying for many years is the relationship of the campus, the place of the university, the physical place of the university, to the cities in which it's situated. And as you can well imagine, there's been quite a bit of change in that relationship, both the form of the actual physical campus of a university, but also a change in the way in which the university relates to its context based on technology. And of course, the question, where does the campus really reside if many students are or are projected to be doing so much learning in the cloud, online. But I want to kind of get to that point maybe through just a progression of some images and quick ideas. Because I'm an architect, I can't really speak without pictures, so I'm sharing a few with you here. What you're seeing right now is, and I'm realizing I don't have What you're seeing right now is actually two images of the university where I teach, the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, Michigan, near Detroit. It's a rather traditional university campus designed in the middle of the 19th century, very focused on a central space. It's what some people would call a legacy campus, the original campus of the university organized around central quads or central lawns, very often in the United States, separate from cities, meant to be not within the city so that students wouldn't be tempted by the vices and the distractions of the city. Of course, in places like this, the city grows up around the campus over time, over 100 years, and the relationships begin to change. But this is not unlike many American large research university campuses like my own, with about 50,000 students in it. But of course, as we know, a lot of education is shifting to online, or at least it's projected to be shifting online. Of course, we already do quite a bit of hybrid teaching on my campus, where we do some of it online and we do some of it in person, and the relationship, the way in which technologies enables us to provide information to students, to bring other people to students through webinars and other kinds of environments where we can bring speakers from New York or Madrid or Barcelona, as I've done in my classes, in live time for students to exchange with other people, but still located in the place of the classroom and on the place of the campus. Of course, there is now the possibility and the actuality of people studying online, using those same technologies while sitting at home. And one of the things I'm showing here, I'm showing the website of edX, which is one of the larger online providers in the United States, co-sponsored by, among other universities, Harvard University and MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. What you're seeing, though, the image taken from my computer screen a couple of, maybe a year or so ago, is the way in which one of those courses is advertised. It's a very famous course taught by a very important philosophy professor who, when he teaches the class at Harvard, it has 500 students in the classroom. And he teaches that class also. It's provided as an online version. One of the things that's very interesting about this class is that when you go to the edX website to look for it, there's little trailers for each of these courses as little advertisements to get you to take them. And what you see is Michael, I believe his name is Sandel, engaging with students, the pictures of him talking in the classroom. He's in the library, he's walking along the quaint lawns and quads of Harvard University. So the suggestion is that by participating in this class, of course, you are also participating somehow in the life of Harvard University. So even though the course resides purely in the cloud, online, the image, the sense of place that the university represents, that its teachers and its spaces of learning represents, is still important conceptually to the promotion of this kind of course. Now, another great impactor of higher education in the United States, and I know here in Russia and other places, is the role of the development of new technology, research in new technologies, and the creation of new knowledge. One of the major roles of a university is to create new knowledge, not only to educate students, but also to produce knowledge. And so American research universities have developed over time into both simultaneously spaces of teaching, but also spaces of creation of ideas, creation of technologies, creation of new products. And what you're seeing on the screen right now is actually one of the results of that. You're seeing an image of what's known as the Googleplex, which are the headquarters of Google in Silicon Valley, and the interiors of Google's offices in New York. And what's interesting about the Googleplex is the way in which it has, where it developed in Silicon Valley, it's made possible by the presence of Stanford University, which in trying to grow out its own technology capacities, its own research capacities, began to develop land just outside their campus to host new companies as startups or incubators and so on. And that is the origin of the growth of Silicon Valley, and in many cases the origin of the technologies that make online learning possible. What you see here, though, is that the Googleplex, which is very much an interiorized campus itself, can't get in. You do everything inside of it. You eat inside of it. You do all of your work inside of it. In the Google offices, it's meant to be a kind of 24/7 environment where young people hang out and get their best work done. The Googleplex itself sits in a very large suburban context, a sprawling one. One that isn't very place-based. And so this is something that I research and think about again, which is what is the role of place when we're talking about technologies that bring us, allow us to collaborate, work, and even learn online. And here you have just a quick picture of Stanford University, an aerial view, and then a map that shows you where Stanford University is, where the research park, the original research park, is located, and then where some of the major corporations, companies that you know, are located adjacent or nearby in the great Silicon Valley. So you're seeing Google, you're seeing AOL. I can't see what I've written down all that well. Yeah.
Sorry, I think that the organizers ask us to make a pause to make an important announcement here. Could you do that? Вы хотели сделать объявление?
I think the organizers wanted to make an announcement. Apologies, the announcement is off the mic. Translation is not possible. So can we continue? Should we expect for some kind of announcement to be made?
Mother found him. Yeah, thank you. Sorry for that.
No. The child is found.
And Patrick, would you like to comment on that from your point of view, or will you?
I could just quickly go through the rest.
Okay.
Yes. And what we're seeing. What we're seeing is the way in which these technologies have caused a kind of growth of economic development, not only in Silicon Valley, which you're seeing here, and in San Francisco, but around the country, very often related to where university campuses are located. So for instance, you can see there's one bubble there that says Ann Arbor. That's where my campus is, near Detroit. A huge amount of technological development made possible by the research of the university that is enabled by the technologies of communication that we use today. Or we see in New York City, this is not connected to the university per se, but the outgrowth, again, of the development of new kinds of spaces that are both incubator spaces for creation, but also spaces for learning. You're seeing a website called Digital NYC, which allows people to find out where new kinds of workspaces are, new kinds of incubator and startup spaces, where there are new jobs, where there are places to meet and have events. And what you're seeing on next to that, I guess on your right, my right too, is an example of how these kinds of spaces, these new kinds of research and learning environments are being used to promote the development of industry, new technology in industry and startup economy. this is a kind of result or outgrowth of this. Another example, this is the campus of the University of Chicago on the south side of Chicago, which is where I worked. I didn't work at the University of Chicago, but I lived in Chicago for 18 years. And you can see sort of what I was talking about before, the way in which the Legacy campus, which is the part in the lower part of the screen, was built very much outside of the city to be its own enclave, to be a place apart, to be near the city, but not so near the city that the city would be distracted. And you can see how they used the neo-Gothic architecture to create an enclave for the students and the faculty to teach. But among the kinds of things that are coming out of places like the University of Chicago are incubator spaces. This is one, I actually just picked this up the other day when I was back in Chicago visiting friends. The university is starting a business incubator space to encourage new business around the campus, to provide a place for activities to happen. That's an outgrowth of the learning, but also as an attempt to revitalize the neighborhood around it, because the neighborhood around the University of Chicago, parts of it are rather run down. There isn't very much business there. So they're trying to encourage startup, largely technology companies, but other kinds of companies, to relocate there and to co-locate adjacent to the campus. The idea that even though we can communicate with one another without place, we want to be together to promote ideas and development. Sorry. I'm going to just skip over these. And there are other kinds of spaces that result from this. Once we're able to work on the computer and work anywhere we want to be, people start to feel very isolated. So where did people start to come together? Well, first, coffee shops. This is a coffee shop, Café Moustache, in my old neighborhood in Chicago. Very lovely place to go get a latte and to sit on your computer all day and to talk to people. But that started to get a little bit tedious. You have to buy coffee all the time. And one of the things that's been happening is the development of shared spaces for co-working, coming together, sharing spaces, sharing services, sharing locations that have very high quality technology connections, internet connections, so that you can conduct your work globally, but again, be located with other people in the same place and perhaps develop new ideas and technologies with them. Here are just some images of what some of those places look like. This one is, these are hubs. Hubs are kind of interesting because they're co-working spaces, shared working spaces for people whose work is related to social innovation. Not just any innovation, but innovation designed to make change within the world. Some of what those spaces look like. I wanted to show these images because a lot of learning environments are increasingly looking like this as well, where they're less hierarchical, where you can come together in different kinds of spaces. Walking into the hall today, I was noting all the different ways in which people, largely young people today, were around the computers or sitting in the lounges with their computers, talking to one another and talking to other people. That creates a different kind of space that people want to occupy and be in, and that is changing both education spaces and also the space of work, often for people who've just recently graduated from college and are starting their new businesses. And starting need space to work with others. This results in new kinds of art spaces sometimes, new kinds of galleries, new kinds of life to communities, to neighborhoods that didn't have some of these activities before. And other kinds of, here they're often called make spaces. Spaces where you can get together and not just make technology, but make physical things. So this is a place that has actually recently closed called Third Ward in New York, where people would come together, be able to use tools that they couldn't access on their own and actually make things in the post-industrial environment, right? In the post-industrial environment, we've lost the ability to make things, but people want to make things. So these are environments for doing that. Workspace incubators, these are architectural firms that have come together in this case to share a space to do different kinds of work, different kinds of offices doing different kinds of things so that they can influence one another. New kinds of media labs that use technology and technological development to work both within communities and to communicate around the world as part of a media lab network. This is one in New York called iBeam. And that's sort of it, a kind of quick overview of the different kinds of spaces that result or are made possible both as educational environments, but also I think post-educational environments that technology allows for.
I will just ask one question
Sure.
and then proceed with the comment. The question is that sometimes more often I start to see the notion of co-learning spaces. What is the difference between co-working and co-learning? Is it can we see the places where that are meant to be used by younger people, like school children?
So the spaces, and I'm sorry I actually didn't show one image. I do have, there's a space in the Chicago Public Library. It's in a part of the library where at one time they had books, but they don't have books anymore. And it's actually designed for, mostly for young teenagers who can get together. They do a lot of work in media around the city, but then they can come together in this co-learning space and learn how to develop the media the interviews they've done, or the videos they've made, or the things they've learned. And it's a space in the center of the city where, even though they're from different parts of all across the city, they can come together and meet one another and use both the technologies and the fact of being in that one place. It's definitely not in the school, and it's purposefully not in the school. It's purposefully in the library, because one of the things that we're seeing is that library spaces are really being transformed into new kinds of learning environments as well, both for children and for adults, because very often they are sites that can bring together the technologies that people can't afford necessarily on their own, and that need to be developed together. So it's a really good question.
And Patrick, first, in the Paris Cycle, how are you going to use this kind of new type of places involving? And what do you think? Will we see a big amount of startups offering this kind of space services, like international co-working brand like Starbucks in co-working or co-learning? Or will we see some proposal from the government, like we have public schools and public libraries and public co-working spaces and co-learning spaces?
Well, thank you. I'm really happy to be here. And as was the case 2 days ago, Sharon has the facility of explaining everything connected to space, and so I can focus on other phenomena that are around it, which is better because I'm an economist and not an architect or an urbanist. To touch on your question, when I joined this team in Paris-Saclay 2 years ago, and we're now really starting building this whole project, and 2 years ago when I arrived, we're actually refurbishing and expanding an existing campus in a valley, and we're moving to the plateau. So in the valley is this Orsay University, which was built in the 50s and is one of the prominent centers of physics research in France and Europe. And there are some buildings that are not in use anymore, that are more or less industrial buildings. And this looked a bit appealing since there are no Starbucks around and no proper place for people to sit together and try to co-work, co-learn, co-develop, or imagine a startup company. So I went to my boss and I told him we should find a place, and we happened to find one pretty rapidly in those buildings in the Orsay University. We opened 6 months ago, and in 6 months, it's amazing the amount of people who actually came there to organize their own open source meetup groups around data centers, big data, or game design. And we also have conferences and hacking space. So, and it's really open to the students, the entrepreneurs, the artists, and we try to mix all these communities. But to be honest, we don't have much to do. There's only one person to run the facility. We provide coffee, and that's about it. The rest is actually fully operated by the people who want that project to be exposed and recruit new people. This was possible because there's already a vivid community of about 20,000 students, researchers, and teachers. So we were not breaking ground. But those creative communities really lacked a proper space where they could meet and work together. Is that seconds? Okay. So I think this is really instrumental, and the attitude of those creative communities is very, very encouraging. That's why we call this first space the Proto 204. 204 is the number of the building in the university campus, and Proto is for prototype, because it's a prototype space, both in a physical way. We just tried a couple of things like the hacking space, another place to put proper prototypes that people would like to demonstrate, be they hardware stuff, software, whatever. And it's also a prototype in the sense that we want to expand the spirit of what's happening there to other places. So next year, we just finished an inventory of all the incubators, all the incubating spaces linked to the engineer schools and the business schools that are going to form the university, and also the Fab Labs. And a new type of space that we name the connectors, and Proto 204 is a connector. It's not a Fab Lab, it's not an incubator, it's something a bit different. And so altogether, we have 15 spaces that we plan to connect next year, starting next year, to connect in two ways, both with a video link between the 15, sorry. I don't think next year the 15 will be connected, but probably 3 or 4, and then the others will move in. So a video link so that if there's an interesting conference happening in some place, people can watch it from another space and don't have to cross the campus. And in our case, the campus is huge. It's 20 kilometers. Well, there's a dense part, but then there are schools that are scattered over other cities. So it's really important that we offer this facility and to connect them in another way, which is we are going to coordinate what's happening in the different places, especially in the connectors. So we don't make the same conference on the same topic the same week. Things, very basic things like that. Does this answer your question?
Yeah, and what do you think about the startups and the economic part of this new learning spaces? Can this be, are the spaces privately held or is government held? Who is in charge of them?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very important aspect. Who pays the rent? Who pays for the space? And for now, we are paying for it. We're paying minimal fees because actually the university was not using that building, so we just, did some basic painting and put heating, but that's very basic. And this is the way we want it to be, because otherwise the costs will go through the roof. So we have to work on that, on what is the business model for those spaces. For now, it's not really expensive for us to offer. But if we want to develop and move from the prototype phase to something bigger, we have to figure out how to. Now, what's interesting is I spent a lot of time between Harvard and MIT in the past 15 years, and I had an office in a very interesting space in Kendall Square, Massachusetts, well, in Cambridge, Mass, next to MIT, which is called the Cambridge Innovation Center, and was created by Tim Rowe 14 years ago. It's a fully private business model, and he started 14 years ago with 2,000 square meters and probably 20 startup companies hosted there. There are now over 500 companies, half of them startups from MIT, and he runs 25,000 square meters. He's been incredibly successful in his model, which is not cheap, but is very high on services and on sharing facilities and providing access to resource.
Sharon, do you want to ask the same question? Or who should be in charge of this co-learning and co-working spaces? Because when we talk about business and startups, it's like more or less clear. But when we talk about, for example, higher education, if a person starts receiving online degree, he's working more or less alone. Sometimes the courses are free. He can receive higher education totally free or just with a less amount of funds. Will we see more spaces that are provided by government? What do you believe for this kind of new students? Another thing is that the Anant Agarwal, who is the head of edX, he recently told that he believes that lots of university, about half of the university, will be closed in 15 years because of this shift in online and offline services. What will be with that places that are not really meant for this new kind of learning processes?
So it's an interesting question. I know that there's quite a bit of debate between the promoters of spaces like edX and the actual universities themselves, particularly in the United States, where we're actually not seeing declines in enrollment in actual physical universities. What we're actually seeing, and I think it's a kind of more interesting model, is students doing part of their education online and part of their education in place, and putting that together, being able to weave that together. And I think a lot of universities are developing the kinds of spaces, the kind of curricula that make that possible. The edX model has not proven itself as a business model, how to pay for it. So the statistics on how many people actually are actually getting degrees in that kind of way is not known just yet. There's clearly certainly online institutions in the United States, educational institutions, their business model is they charge a lot of money. And so you get your degree, but you also pay a lot of money for it. So, there's a whole lot of different models in this ecosystem of online education, and I don't think we're yet at the point where we know what's going to fall out. I think personally what's going to happen is that we're going to have a very complex ecosystem. In terms of who pays for it, the spaces themselves, edX has higher education support from two of the wealthiest, they're founded by two of the wealthiest universities in the country. My university invests a lot of money in its IT infrastructure, in creating the kinds of spaces for students to both learn in and to incubate ideas in. I go into the library and there's a little space where students can go in and develop podcasts. It's really exciting to watch them doing their own podcasts. There's certainly, in my country, no state support for this. If anything, I work at a public university, which means in theory it's state-sponsored, but only less than 8% of our budget actually comes from the state. So for the most part, these are these are things that are either developed by universities or by businesses, and therefore, ideally there's this ideal of a kind of shared space, but it does actually cost money. So I think Patrick probably can speak a little bit better to the financing of this, but...
Well, finally, I won't touch the business model part because I think it's probably a bit early to really understand what's going to happen. I'd rather take a very long-term perspective around three ideas. What is the essence of a university campus? What is, and has been explored by Dan Bresnitz, which I cited to you 2 days ago in my talk to, around collaborative public spaces. And third, what could be the influence of the internet and the online-offline debate. So long-term perspective on university campuses is, maybe we can't go back 2,000 years ago to the museum in Alexandria when it was, but it was at the time the idea of bringing together people with different types of knowledge and skills and put them in one place and make that place accessible to whoever wanted to learn. So this hasn't changed much as the basics of what a campus is. And then coming to the Renaissance and the string of universities across Europe, from Saragossa to Montpellier, La Sorbonne, and so on, going up north to Russia, there was two interesting ideas. Well, one is the campus itself is extraterritorial to the city, meaning that to guarantee the freedom of thought on the campus, police should not be allowed in the campus. This has worked more or less well across time, depending on space and time. But this is also a very fundamental principle. And the other is that this network of university would collaborate and host scholars from the other universities. So it's a network of knowledge and a network of people. I think those two components are also the basics of the internet. It's the same. Freedom of thought, freedom of speech, and then you can collaborate with people. So it's interesting to note that the internet and the academic campus are in fact the same thing. Only one is a physical space and the other one is a virtual space. So this brings us to collaborative public space and inline online. What Dan Bresnitz showed in his first book, which is called Innovation and the State, is based on three examples, which are Taiwan, Israel, and Ireland, how those three countries, in very under high pressure, all three of them, managed to transition from a very rural economy to a high-tech economy in 20 years. Each of them with a very definite specialty, and each of them, that's what Dan chose, using a mechanism that is provided by the state. In the case of Taiwan, it's an institute called ITRI, I-T-R-I, which is the institute from the state for hardware development. And this is where actually Taiwan built its expertise among private companies, but through this public collaborative institute. And this is how Taiwan became the leading, if not the only, provider of computers today and motherboards. Israel was a bit different because it's the military who had a need for computing engineers and provided this collaborative public space through conscription and through reserve, because it meant that people would stay 3 years in that office of computing for the army and then go back to civil life, form companies because they had learned skills, then go back every year or every 18 months for a period of reserve, and then train the people within the military with the latest techniques they have been developing in their private companies. So this system actually led to the expansion of the IT industry, but software in this case, in Israel, which was very, very successful. And the last is Ireland with a bit of a different path because it's mostly the development agency called EDA and now Enterprise Ireland who helped frame the whole policy of hosting multinational companies, but tech companies, to Ireland through tax breaks, but with the idea of building then a cluster around IT and software, and this has been done with Trinity College in Dublin and so on. So if you're interested in learning a bit more about that, I really advise you to read this book. But this brings us to the third and last point, which is, to me, there's no competition between online and offline.
No.
On the contrary, it both actually nurture each other. And it's really important, probably, that the physical space is still provided by the government or a public body, because this model has been successful for centuries, so there's no reason to change it. As the Americans say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And as for the internet, there's a very important ongoing debate. It's more in the open in the US right now with the Obama administration trying to guarantee equal access to the internet. But it's actually a worldwide debate, and I think it's a very, very important one. And it's difficult to see how governments can actually contribute to that, since the internet is by essence a global system. So it's going to be really interesting to see how things shape up and how people can gain control on that free space, although it's a virtual space, over the years to come.
That's interesting. And the last thing I would like to talk to you about is one of the important trend in education is mobility. Like, it's really became mobile. You can learn from see a video with your lecture from your phone and come with your laptop to the park or anywhere. How do this new type of space reflect this trend? What kind of spaces do we need for that? How should universities or school transform to keep this as an important part of education? Like, as a child, you don't have to sit all the day in the school if you can watch some of your lessons online in your phone, or you can do something in phone and send it to your teacher and live in your rural space and not go into the city if your parents can't drive you every day, for example. And even with the university, it's even more true in some fields of education, because if it's not really, if it doesn't require really high-tech instruments and tools, and it's like more humanity subjects, why do you need to come for the university as much as you used to do?
Well, I think increasingly you come to the university for the learning environment less, and more for what the university is providing as a space for exchange and conversation that is both the exchange that you have on your device, or is possible on your device, and the exchange that you have by chance encounter in space. Clearly, I mean, the technologies have very much changed the way in which we teach. The ability to communicate with students online, not just in class, to exchange ideas, to use blogs. I mean, from the perspective of a faculty member, our ability to disseminate information, what we're doing in our class with our own students, then can be seen by other students in other schools, and you can have more conversations around that. Since I teach architecture, at least to date, very few people, actually I'm not sure how many people even at all successfully have come up with a way to teach something that is around a drawing or a model very well in anything but physical space. Particularly if we want to continue to encourage students to not only use the computer and 3D printers and laser cutters and all those great things we get to use, these new toys we have, but also still to draw by hand and to express our ideas in a kind of immediacy. And so the architectural studio is the place in which that happens. And for me, what I really love about the architectural studio, and I hope there are some architecture students here, is that it is, in my mind, the first incubator collaborative space. For me, I don't project a future, kind of what will be the outcome of all of this. I think these are constantly changing and developing sense of relationships. And I think that, and it's moving very quickly, but I don't see just one as a result. My students still come to class, even though they can watch my lectures afterwards, because they can also come to me and have a conversation. And they can have a conversation with the person next to them.
Very briefly, I think as we heard in the conference we were part in 2 days ago, there's in the future of campuses, and the one we're building is both a university and a housing, a city with housing, public services, schools, and economic development, companies, startups, everything. So it's meant to be a full city. But I think we're not the only ones trying to do that, and we don't have the magical recipe for that. I think what will be key is the ability to let the users, the students, the teachers, the artists, whoever, decide of the use of some of that space, built space. Because I think master plans are really powerful, as our colleague Hui Wang explained the other day, for creating the whole system. But then within the system, what we're seeing, especially in the startup economy, is that it's the user-driven services and really taking into account the fact that not every sub-community will have the same needs. So they should be able to tailor to their needs part of this common space. And this should be evolving over time, because we know that the world will be very different in 50 years than it is from now.
Thank you, and I would like to proceed with a question from the auditory. Пожалуйста, задавайте вопросы.
So we're now. We just wait for the microphone to be put on.
For your speech, it was really interesting. And my name is Max. I'm a postgraduating student in Moscow Pedagogical University, and I'm a practicing tutor. So I am a tutor of prof-orientation program in Moscow Cultural Center called Perspectiva. So I'm here with my students. Some of them are here also because they're interested in the theme. So Natalia said something about mobility, and I remembered my question, my interest about student mobility, but not about digital, but about going abroad to study, etc. So how do you think, is it possible to make a bigger network of co-workings between maybe US and Russia, between European countries, some things that will provide mobility of students to work together in physical way? Because I know there are lots of networks for international communication between students, but I don't know any case about this physical realization of this idea. So what do you think? Maybe you know some examples or maybe your ideas. Thank you.
Well, I mean, I think what's interesting about some of the examples I showed, for instance, the hubs, they're not students. Very often they're very recent graduates, but that is an international group that, I mean, they're located all around the world. And I think you raise a very interesting point. I mean, I run, as chair of an architecture program, a whole lot of travel opportunities for our students and our faculty, and the best ones are those that are linked to students elsewhere. And the best ones, I think, are those where the students maintain collaborative relationships as they move forward. I think the point of having spaces where people can kind of come together from around the world as a network, I haven't yet seen that, but I believe that it is going to happen very soon. Because I think that the students who are operating that way already, who might be doing a project, they come together, they do a project in China, let's say, they stay for a week or two, then they're exchanging the information across, and then through video link are having joint final reviews. We tend to organize that on a one-to-one basis. It would be very exciting to see that as a global organization. Whether it actually needs physical spaces or the traditional spaces are linked through another kind of network is something that's interesting to think about. But I think that notion of mobility, both walking around with your screen mobility, but traveling around the world. I mean, we have more travel programs now than we have ever had, and part of the reason is that it is so important for our students to leave not only our campus, but our country. And it's so much better when they, in my opinion, don't just go on their own, but when they spend a week or 2 weeks with other students someplace else working on a project.
Yes, absolutely. Just to add two things. I think as far as business models, we know today that there are the exchange programs between universities that will, I'm sure, bring a lot to the startup scene and bring a lot of new projects. So that's a business model that really is based on the exchange between universities. The other business model that exists is business centers like Rigas. You can, if you get a card from Rigas, it's really expensive, but then you can go to any of their business center around the world. So that works. So to mix the two, what we need is the Airbnb for startups. And I'm sure we're going to see that in the very next month or years because it makes a lot of sense.
Следующий вопрос.
Next question, please. Would you please take the microphone? Good afternoon. I have the following question, or rather a comment. Would you please comment on some circumstances of the city's developing of Moscow beyond the borders of Moscow City Road? If you're aware of these issues, would you be ready to comment on that? Would you please specify your question? Would you please introduce yourself? My name is Sergei Solin. I represent the Moscow region, and namely the Железнодорожный city. According to the Russian legislation, the cities that are self-organized and are subordinate to the subject of the Russian Federation are called the city districts, and as of today, the leadership of the Russian Federation took the decision to unite two city districts that would be considered a single city with a population of 500,000 people. However, the leadership of Russia and the municipal authorities want to go further. They think that 500,000 population is not enough. They would like to create some kind of municipality of around 1 million people by the year 2030. And my question to you, think of two European towns with an average population of 250,000 and 150,000 people. Each of these cities have their own park areas, green areas or gardens, maybe some woods that do not belong to the municipal authorities, but a federal ownership, let's say, of Germany. And it happens so that these two towns are being united for some reasons, no matter whether these are cultural. Sorry, I don't understand what is the question. Well, the question is the following to our distinguished speakers. Can you think of such a situation? Would that be possible in Europe? Is there a way to increase the number of population of these citizens without barking new trees or eliminating some green areas and by destroying dozens of hectares of green territories? What does it have to do with educational space? Sorry.
Specific aspect of the question, but we have, yeah, everywhere when you're building a project and putting things together, of course, you're changing things. Look, I don't know anything about what you're saying, but I mean, there's the same ongoing debate around Paris to create a bigger city. The inner city is 2 million inhabitants, so the idea is to extend governance. I don't know if that was your question, but yeah, I think it's about the same everywhere. We're trying to figure out in the various parts of Europe how to better deal with these.
Следующий вопрос.
Next question, please. Actually, we are short of time and we have to move to and we don't even have time for the next question. Well, we could probably discuss questions later one-to-one. Unfortunately, we are done now. We don't have any further time. Thank you.